Today we have a smaller agenda than usual, so hopefully we'll be able to get through business in a timely manner. With that, I'll hand over to Mike, who'll take us through some housekeeping rules, and we'll go to the first item on the agenda. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and if I can echo those comments and welcome everyone to today's meeting. In terms of practical announcements for members who are physically present, there were no fire alarm drills scheduled, therefore if the alarm does sound, your details have been taken and I'll ensure you're safely escorted from the chamber. Returning to our items of business today, in terms of apologies, I have apologies from Councillor Billy Marat and from Councillor Sue Walker. That therefore brings us up to our full complement of members, and I'll therefore now turn to matters on today's agenda. Members will note that you have items 5 and 6 presently listed in your papers. However, I can advise that both items, that is number 5 related to Crawford House on Rose Lane in Mossley Hill in Church Ward, and indeed item number 6, Utting Avenue in Clubmore Ward, have been withdrawn from consideration today. In relation to both matters, in relation to the second item, committee will recall at your meeting of 15th of June, you determined this application, and it was initially thought there were some outstanding matters to be resolved by committee. However, those were in fact addressed through the original permission committee granted. Therefore, that decision is now acceptable and is enacted. In terms of our items therefore remaining on today's meeting, do members have any declarations of interest? If so, could you please indicate clearly now for the benefit of the record? For the benefit of everyone watching the live stream of proceedings, there were no declarations of interest declared by members. We therefore now move to item number 2, the minutes of our last meeting. And again, members, if I can refer you to pages 4 to 28 of the agenda pack, which comprise the minutes of our meeting held on the 15th of June. Do members have any comments? If so, you can indicate now. If not, Chair, are you happy to move agreement?
Are the minutes agreed? Thank you.
Benefit of the public record, the committee has unanimously approved the minutes of our last meeting. I can also pleased to advise that we have no urgent items of business to consider today. So with that in mind, we will now move to item number 4 on today's agenda, which relates to the Sefton Park Care Village, which is at Bishop's Court Nursing Home, Sefton Park Road, Liverpool L8, and which is located in Princes Park Ward.
Thank you, Mike. Can I invite Ben Kent, the agent for the applicant, to address the committee?
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
We can, thank you, Ben. If you just come a bit closer to your microphone because your audio is quite low. Thank you. Benefits of colleagues viewing the live stream of proceedings, our speaker just in their microphone and will be introducing their presentation shortly. So please bear with us during this brief course of proceedings. Thank you.
I'm sorry about this. Are you still able to hear me?
That's better, thank you now.
Right, I just can't see anything. I'm sorry about this. I've lost the connection.
By way of assistance, we are on the introductory slide of your presentation with the 3GI view showing the 42 new apartments in visualization view.
Okay, I'll talk about it without seeing it if that's okay. So the first slide shows the main building that fronts Sefton Park Road. It's a 3-storey brick-faced building comprising of 26 accessible M42 over 55 units. Next slide, please. This slide shows the location plan. Within the red line is the proposed 2 number buildings which are to be demolished and replaced. And within the blue line is the existing buildings owned within the ownership of the applicant that form the wider part of the Sefton Park Village. Next slide, please. The proposed site plan shows the 3 proposed blocks, with the main block facing Sefton Park Road, as described earlier, as a 3-storey block, with the 2 secondary mews style 2-storey blocks to the rear, both containing 8 units each. The design is based around a central courtyard containing parking, which there's 100% parking for the amount of units on the site, and shared amenity spaces. Next slide, please. This shows the main block facing Sefton Park, the elevations. These are all to be constructed mainly, well, all in brick and facing brick to match the existing area, with 4 gables facing Sefton Park Road. Next slide, please. And again, this is the main block facing Sefton Park Road, showing the 2 plans, the ground and first, again consisting of 26 units in total, all to M42 standards, with an internal bin, cycle and scooter store. And that's it. So the scheme in general comprises of the demolition of 2 existing buildings which aren't fit for use, replaced by 3 number purpose-built buildings, with, as described, 100% car parking. Yeah, so I think that's it. I'm really sorry about this. I don't know what's happened to my screen. I just can't see anything.
Thank you, Ben. That was indeed your last slide. I'm just going to take the presentation off screen for everyone viewing proceedings. Then you'll be able to see members of the committee, and they may well have a number of questions for you. Thank you.
Do members have any questions for Mr. Kent? Councillor Maloney.
Thanks, Chair. My question is Highways Matters 3.4. And I note, I have concern that the number of car parking spaces is not adequate given the number of places. And more importantly, I think the number of charging bays for electric vehicles is only 3 spaces. And I don't think that in any way is adequate in terms of future-proofing this development. I mean, when looking at in the next 10 years, well, in 9 years' time, only electric vehicles will be able to be sold. And I would have thought within a very short time, given the nature of the area, I think most of the residents will be reasonably affluent. And I think those 3 spaces will be entirely inadequate. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Maloney. Mr. Kent, could you answer those questions?
Yeah, the parking provision is based on the council standards of...
Mr. Kent, could you speak a bit louder, please? I think members are having difficulty hearing what you're saying.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. The parking provision is based and was agreed during the pre-app of 100% occupancy of the amount of units. And in regards to electric charging, you're correct, it's free currently, and I don't know if there's any provision for future-proofing that, but currently it's been agreed to be free.
I mean, we can bring the highways officer in when we go to the officer's summary. Okay. Is that okay? Do any other members have any questions? Councillor Key.
Thanks, Chair. Can the applicant detail the energy efficiency schemes in this development?
There's currently, I'm not aware of any renewable schemes to be involved in this development.
Do any other members have any questions for Mr. Kent? No? Well, can I bring in the case officer to take us through this report?
Thank you, Chair. I'm John Woodward from the South team in Development Control. The application we have before us today is for the Sefton Park Care Village. It's an application to redevelop part of an existing care facility on Sefton Park Road to provide a new block of 26 flats and a mews development to the rear of 16 flats, and it's targeted at the over 55 market. the sites within an established residential area and also within the Princes Park conservation area. The proposal's been considered against relevant national and local policy in relation to its land use, and it's acceptable in this location. The design, scale and relationships to surrounding buildings and the Princes Park conservation are acceptable, and the applicant has worked with officers to choose materials that we feel would be befitting of the area. In terms of highways, head of highways has raised no objections in respect of any traffic generation, the parking provision, servicing and access. The apartments would provide a good standard of amenity and would not be detrimental to any surrounding residential properties. If you scan through the committee report, it provides a commentary on the development in relation to trees on and surrounding the sites, ecology, accessibility, archaeology and drainage, which have all been found to be acceptable. The application would require a legal agreement seeking contributions in respect of open space, street trees, art and monitoring, amounting to just over £85,000, and it's recommended on that basis for approval.
Yeah, thank you. In relation to some of the questions that were asked by Councillor Maloney in relation to car parking and the electric parking, could you just maybe in detail answer? It was Andy, you're going to answer that. Is there sufficient parking, and have we got enough electric parking points?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, for this application, there's actually 51 car parking spaces for 41 flats, which is a higher level of provision than we'd normally expect, especially for residential accommodation that'll tend to accommodate older people. With older people, the levels of car ownership tend to be a little bit lower than across the general population. In terms of EV charging, well, this is a situation that's changing all the time with the shift more so towards electric vehicles. The applicant's proposing 3 spaces, which is about 5% provision across all of the spaces being provided on site. And at this moment in time, we think that's a reasonable amount of EV charging points for this particular development. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Maloney, and any other members wish to ask a question? Okay, Councillor Maloney.
Thanks, Chair. I would say I think 3%. I understand that's the figure that is currently the case, but I think in terms of the way sales of electric vehicles are going and the fact that it's inevitable, I think on a new development we should be looking at a much higher figure. I would suggest off the top of my head 50% of car parking places, of those car parking places, because residents in the blocks will not have any other, that's their home, and so that will be the place they will look at for charging their vehicles, and also for any visitors, both staff and also visitors to see the residents as well. So I think 3 spaces is entirely inadequate. And I would ask, how is this 3% figure being reviewed? And also on the overall car parking spaces, I'd like to ask what monitoring is done, especially with this kind of accommodation where you've got a set number of car parking spaces with no street car parking over the last number of years. Whether the figures that are put down in the guidelines are actually adequate, or whether there's an overspill and whether there's a detrimental effect on surrounding residents. So I'd be interested to hear how these figures are monitored for specific cases, how many have been done, and what's the general guidelines on monitoring the impact. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Maloney. Andy, do you want to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, I suppose that the council needs to constantly review its parking standards, and now wouldn't be a bad time to do that in the circumstances following on from the pandemic, etc. It's difficult. I suppose you would always want future-proof developments, but we really don't know what transport systems are going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years. We'll be talking about autonomous vehicles, etc. You know, we've got the electric scooters across the city. So transport as a whole is changing. You know, there's a shift away from public transport also because of the effects of the pandemic. So I suppose it's one of those things that is constantly changing, and we constantly need to update our parking standards and our transport policies as well. And that's something the council does in conjunction with the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. In terms of this particular site and the level of car parking that's being proposed, I think there's very, very little likelihood of any overspill car parking taking place as a result of this development, given the provision that's made within the curtilage of the site. Got no objections. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Just Andy when he thought it was safe to go out. I think Councillor Maloney's got a point in terms of how many electric points should be there, but the problem we've got at the moment is we've got no stats. No, we don't know how fast, we envisage how fast the electric cars are going to churn out, but there's a lot of space between now and when it's supposed to happen. We've seen government change so regular and so frequent, but perhaps come from this committee that maybe highways or somebody may do some preparatory work on the scale and the speed that electric cars are going to be run out, and perhaps then using that data can come up with some kind of policy for Liverpool in terms of new developments, what we'd expect and that kind of stuff. So at least the developers have got some ideas of what we think we require, but that'll take a little bit of research, a little bit of data gathering, and I guess somebody somewhere, certainly within the motor industry, will have that data. Then we can apply perhaps a policy that will work for us.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hanson. Do any other members have any questions for any of the officers? Well, I mean, it is a sensible suggestion that we do, obviously, and I think the Highways Officer has indicated that we review our policy, you know, going forward. And we all know that the electric cars, you know, electric vehicles are going to come in. And we do need the infrastructure to go with it. So we do need to keep abreast of what's going on. But I think in this particular case, I think I'm satisfied that we have got enough reasonable car parking spaces, and the electric parking points are adequate for this particular scheme. I think it ticks all the boxes, I think, in relation to the policy. So therefore, I'm going to move that the recommendation is approved. Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Before moving to the vote formally, do any members wish to move an amendment in relation to the Chair's recommendation?
Chair, could I move an amendment that a condition be applied that the number of electric vehicle car charging points be increased from 3 to 9?
Has that got to be seconded, please?
Chair, before I invite the seconder, I'm going to ask the Head of Planning to comment. I'm just conscious that in terms of particular issues, in terms of the appropriateness of conditions and the reasonableness of their application in the context of our current planning policy framework.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, Mike's right. And we have a policy in the local plan which stipulates the percentage of chargeable points for any development coming forward. And the team have explained that that's compliant with that policy. So it wouldn't be reasonable in this respect to increase that number. But by all means, you're entitled to propose it. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Just returning to the matter moved by Councillor Maloney, clearly as stated by the Head of Planning, the issue with any particular permission, and when you apply conditions, those conditions have to be reasonable and proportionate and related to the planning policies being enforced at this time. As the Head of Planning has indicated, we do have an emergent local plan which is at an advanced stage of consideration, which includes provision for the relevant percentage level of EV charges within developments. And obviously, Councillor Maloney, in seeking to move this amendment, will be seeking to move a level in excess of that within the emergent policy. Therefore, with that in mind and noting those particular caveats for your consideration, members, does anyone wish to second Councillor Maloney's amendment? Councillor Lake has visually indicated in the chamber that he wishes to second the amendment and will therefore vote on that amendment. So in terms of the amendment, which will be to approve the recommendation subject to an additional condition, and again, I would remind members of my comments in relation to the reasonableness of such a condition. Or Councillor Conception, first of all, as Chair, your vote, please.
Against.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bennett. Thank you. Councillor Cummings.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Prince.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Maloney.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lake.
For.
And Councillor Key.
Abstain.
Thank you, councillors. That concludes the voting on the amendment. The amendment falls on the basis that 2 members have voted in favour, 5 members have voted against, and 1 member has abstained. We will therefore revert to the Chair's original motion, which will be to approve the recommendation subject to a legal agreement and the conditions as set out in the detailed case officer report. So therefore, I will move to the vote. Chair, your vote, please.
For.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bennett. Thank you. Councillor Cummings.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Prince.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Maloney.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Lake.
Abstain.
Thank you. And lastly, Councillor Key.
For.
Thank you, councillors. That concludes the voting on this particular application. The voting is 7 members in favour, no members voting against, 2 councillors abstaining. Therefore, the application is approved subject to Section 106 agreement and the relevant conditions as set out in the case officer report. And thank you again to the applicant for attending today's meeting and addressing us in relation to the matters raised and answering questions from members of the committee. We will therefore move on to our next items of business. As members will recall, at the start of proceedings, I referenced that a number of items have been withdrawn from consideration today. Items numbers 5 and 6. So we'll therefore move to item number 7, which relates to numbers 330 to 332 Scotland Road, Liverpool 5, which is located in Everton Ward. There will now be a very brief pause whilst the local ward council is invited into the chamber to address us in relation to the application. For the benefit of public viewing proceedings online, to advise we are waiting the arrival of a local ward councillor who will be addressing us on application number 7. So please bear with us for this brief pause in proceedings. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Corbett. We found you. You have up to 3 minutes to address the committee in relation to this application. Thank you.
Chair, very briefly before we bring in Councillor Corbett, it may be beneficial by way of context to display a number of slides showing the development prior to Councillor Corbett's address. And whilst it's a variation from normal procedure, I'd suggest the case officer talk us through those slides, and then we can bring in Councillor Corbett so we have a detailed presentation before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. John Hayes, Development Control for the north of the city. Chair, the slides are fairly self-explanatory, I think, and they will take you through the individual floor levels across the building. In very simple terms, this is an application for a house in multiple occupation. And so as we go through the floors, you'll see a number of different rooms, which will be individual rooms as part of the proposed HMO. The configuration of those rooms and the room sizes are set out both on the screen before you, but also in the report. And that's the final slide there in terms of the floor spaces. Just in terms of its location, this is the former Eagle Vaults pub. Image of it there. So it's on the corner of Penryn Street, but obviously it's based on Scotland Road itself, which was obviously a very busy commercial profile to it. And then obviously you've got some some existing commercial units immediately adjacent. On the return frontage on Penryn Street, you obviously have got residential properties as well. Happy to answer any further questions. I'll come back, obviously, once Councillor Corbett's made her comments.
Thanks, John. Councillor Corbett.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies for trying to find me. I was on a Zoom carefully waiting. I thought it might have been a bit later. So for people to understand the context of it, I just wondered if you could put that picture back up, John. Would that be possible? The photo. Sorry, Mike, a photo there. The context of it is that we've got on the other side of the road on Penryn Street, so to the right of that picture, there's quite a large building called the Picture House, and that is being used as, well, it says the Picture House apart. It used to say apartments on it, and when that is full, you get a lot of noise. 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, sometimes even further, off balconies that overlook the properties that are right underneath that lie between the residential area that lies between Wilbraham Street, which is where the Picture House apartments are, and Eagle Vaults on Penryn Street. So what the residents have been really, really worried about is that they're really struggling to cope with the Picture House apartments and all the noise that's coming out from that, and will do when the pandemic restrictions are lifted. And then they've got the Eagle Vaults, which, by the way, has already been a lot of work being done on it over the last few months. So that's been obviously at their own risk. But so you'll have 8 HMO apartments there. And then next door, you've got a tiny gap. And then at the back of that, there's another application in for another 11. So what people are really concerned about is the concentration of people in the area, not necessarily coming to visit, more likely into the area. Obviously, you're close to the city centre because you're on Scotland Road. You're close to both football grounds. So it's not actually helping the residents themselves at all. If you then go to the side of Eagle Vaults, you've got an alleyway there, and you'll be able to see from the drawing, I think probably best, is a small gap between Eagle Vaults and the top of the Penryn. That's right there, the top of the top of Penryn Street houses there, which is a little terrace street which has been around for a very long time. Councillor Hanson will remember it and knows it well. And it's a very stable community there, as it is on the other side of the road on Penryn Street, where some of the newer houses are. Again, a very stable community, but a community under massive pressure. So the impact of putting in an HMO on that corner in that very constrained site, which has one alleyway into the back of the Penryn Street houses, comes out onto Penryn Street, and if the other HMO goes ahead, you'll have 19 units there, is going to be very, very negative. It's also very busy on Scotland Road, as was said before by John Hayes. And if you then have the 19, you will then have problems with car parking there as well, which is also constrained. It's a quite a tight site there, and you're coming out onto Scotland Road. So I'm sure that the developers will probably say, look, you can't look at it all together, but actually it's the build up of that area with HMOs, which is really not helpful, and the negative impact is going to increase. We've got the hotel on the corner, which Kevin McMullen has had for a long time there, Thrussell's Nest, which seems to work very well, actually. It's right next door to St Anthony's. And the road between St Anthony's and the Thrussell's Nest is absolutely, the narrowness of it, I don't think there's anything like it in Liverpool, actually. Very, very narrow. So it's the residential amenity, it's the over-concentration of HMO type of accommodation in that space. The impact of adding in then the existing picture house apartments on the other side, pardon me, in Wilbraham Street, and the concentration that then has, and then you've got the garage in between, and you've got the chicken shack, and you've got it's becoming too tight, and actually it would be listening to the residents really hard about Eagle Vaults. They were saying, look, if they were straightforward flats in there, no problem at all. What one person actually said to me, I used to live in one of the flats upstairs, it was great, but to have that number of units within that space is just too much. It's too much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Corbett. John, do you want to come in on those points first, and I'll ask members of the committee if they got any further questions.
Thank you, Chair. So this application, as you've seen, is for the conversion of the property to an HMO. It's former Eagle Vaults. Part of the proposals within the application are for some minor external changes as well, and I think they were visible on the on the slides earlier. In terms of the policies to be applied and the principle of development, we set those out within the committee report, and as members will be aware, we've now got a new policy within the draft local plan, to which we are now applying significant weight in our consideration of these types of application, which seeks to apply a number of criteria against which these HMOs are to be judged. And that policy is H10, and it is set out in the report how that's to be applied. One of the requirements of the policy is to ensure, in particular, that properties aren't converted where they are suitable for continued use as a family dwelling. And part of the consideration of that is whether or not it's appropriate in terms of its size, scale, etc., to be used as a family dwelling. I think in your officer's view, this has been a former pub. It's on a busy main road. You'll see from the history of the site there has been a number of planning permissions already granted, both for flats and for part of it to be used as an HMO. All of those permissions are still implementable, so they're all still in time and could be implemented in any case. And if you were to do that, you would get the same, actually, if not slightly higher numbers than you would as part of this application, which is for the entirety of the building. So I think in terms of the sort of broader principle, an HMO conversion of a former public house is acceptable. It's then obviously necessary for your officers and for the planning committee to consider the impacts that Councillor Corbett's outlined in terms of residential amenity, particularly the amenity of existing residents, but obviously as well in terms of the future residents. In terms of those future residents, we've set out in the report that this conversion accords with the various policies in the draft local plan, so I'll leave that there. In terms of the impact on existing residents, I do understand the points that have been raised by Councillor Corbett, and clearly these are matters of judgment which you as a committee are required to make. However, if we go back to the photograph, you'll see that this is part of a commercial parade fronting Scotland Road. There are in between Penryn Street and the Apart Hotel that Councillor Corbett referred to. There is also a petrol filling station separating those two. And so just in terms of that sort of mixed use profile with the commercial on the frontage and the residential at the back, I think your officers are of the view that the level of activity would not be so significant as to cause harm. It's, in your officer's view, going to be probably less than that might have been associated with the former use as a public house. And so for all of those reasons, we've concluded that the impact on residential amenity would not be sufficient for the committee to refuse it. Just picking up on a couple of other things, the Apart Hotel that's been referenced is actually under consideration by your officers at the moment. It certainly hasn't been granted as an Apart Hotel, but as this committee will know, there are very significant issues around the interpretation of use classes when it comes to these types of operation. So whether or not they're still within class C3 or whether they're operating as some kind of separate use class is something that we're looking at, and as I say, it's part of an active investigation. The property was granted permission as apartments. Now it may well be that they're now being used as sort of party lets, and obviously that's something that we're looking to deal with if we can. And then the other point that Councillor Corbett made is in relation to the I think the next door but one property to the Eagle Vault is also subject to an application. Again, that has to be considered on its own individual merits. Again, I understand the point about the potential for a concentration of HMOs, but again, I would just refer back to what I said earlier about the sort of mixed commercial and residential profile of the area, and for those reasons, we conclude that there would not be a significant harmful impact on amenity. Happy to answer any further questions, Chair.
Okay, thanks, John. Before I bring in Councillor Cummins and Councillor Kay, has there been any further objections? I understand at the time of the writing the report, there hadn't been any, and there was going to be a petition. Has a petition been received, or has there been any consultation, further objections?
Shall I respond to that one, Chair? So,
You would?
yeah. So what was happening was at that point there was an appeal that had gone in by the Eagle Vaults for non-determination, I think, from memory. There was an appeal anyway that was linked up with the Eagle Vaults one, but at the same time there was an application in for the 11 star HMO at the back, and that was what the petition was linked up with. But what happened was people in the community thought that all of those together was the petition. That's why. So there was over 100 responses that were handed in on that one. So that's the confusion probably from my end rather than anybody else's.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Corbett. Councillor Cummins?
Thank you, Chair. I had two issues to raise here, and the first issue has just been dealt with. The second issue is the ward councillors, and it says no comments received from ward councillors. However, I fully understand why you've come along here to give an argument. Right, it's just that it says there's no response here. No comments received from ward councillors.
Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Cummins, you're addressing the committee, not Councillor Corbett. Can you make your points to the committee?
Yeah. No, but my question was to Councillor Corbett.
I think Councillor Corbett has explained the position.
The council officer.
Councillor Kay.
So I have serious concerns about the size of the bedrooms. So one of the bedrooms is 7.5 square meters. That's really tiny. Another sort of 3 bedrooms are about 10 square meters. Is there a possibility perhaps for those bedrooms to somehow be merged together and provide larger living space?
I think, John, do you want to answer that?
Apologies, I missed that. I was trying to pick up on the previous.
It's in relation to the space standards of bedrooms. Do they meet the policy or not?
Absolutely, Chair. The size for a single person occupancy for a bedroom is around 6.5 square meters. So as you can see, they're all in excess of that by some margin. In fact, they're probably close to being suitable for double rooms. That said, there is a condition on this permission restricting the overall numbers to 8, so there will be 1 person bedrooms.
Councillor Prince.
Okay, I think the best way first of all, I agree with what Councillor Keith said. The best way of doing this is just going through the notes I've written down on this application. First of all, they've got ensuite facilities, which is a good thing. But earlier on, you said it is not suitable for the residential family house, but it's already actually been 1 flat above the pub, presumably the licensee, but it was actually used as, in effect, a family house. And somehow we've managed to change 1 flat upstairs. That's become 8, a 2, a 4, and a 2. And it's particularly the 4 I'm most concerned with. The other thing you mentioned also about it's affordable. It's a way of increasing the number of affordable homes in the city. But that's easy. We keep on making them minuscule. Of course, affordable. It's a very similar argument to saying if you don't use any electricity, you get a 0 electric bill. And my next question is, once you actually accept a flat, if that's what you're going to call them there, how do you actually get to live anywhere better? How do you get out? You don't have a car because there's no car parking facilities there. It's just a roof over your head. You don't have any real possessions because you've got no space for them. It's basically a place where I would say you spend most of your time outside your room as opposed to inside, because every single individual bedroom in my house is much bigger than this, and I don't live in a big house. There's such low expectations, and if you want me to put a planning word on it, I'd say overdevelopment in the general cumulative way that Jane is speaking, but also in terms of the really small size. How can you possibly live in a room that small?
I think, I don't know whether John's going to answer. I think that was just a comment, really, wasn't that? You're opposed to HMOs in principle, I think. But I don't know whether, John, you'd like to respond to any of the points made by Councillor Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Can I just pick up the earlier comment from Councillor Cummins about the no objections? The report does list Councillor Corbett's objection. That there is a statement at the beginning saying at the time of writing this report, no comments or objections have been received following the publicity exercise. I think that's specifically in relation to residents, and obviously Councillor Corbett's referred to that, but it does pick up on Councillor Jane Corbett's comments specifically. In relation to Councillor Prince's comments, I think they are much broader concerns about sort of the expectations in terms of perhaps the wider property market, if you like. There's lots of reasons why there's been a growth in HMOs. One of those is, for example, around housing benefits, for example. I'm sure there is an incentive as well for developers in terms of the profitability of them. Unfortunately, I think there are much broader questions outside of this particular a forum for discussion, I'm afraid. You as the planning committee are required to consider this application against the policies that you have. and perhaps the debate about the growth of HMOs and the reasons for that is for another occasion.
Thanks, John. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There is a comment, and then there's a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I've seen the effect of the HMOs in close proximity to each other and intensified in a given area, and it isn't pleasant. It isn't nice for anybody, regardless of what the stipulations of planning are and how they're explained in this chamber. The reality is that it isn't very nice for anybody. I'm taking up on Councillor Corbett's points. I think if the Throssell's Nest pub is still open, I think that's a hotel as well, isn't it? So you've got a hotel there. There's the St Anthony's Church has a very strong congregation and is well used. You've got the apartments. I had a friend of mine lived in Penryn Street, and I visited often. And Penryn Street I could never park there in the evening. So I'm very concerned about parking in Penryn Street. The other thing is that there's been a number of applications for this, hasn't there? It started out with 2 flats, then it went to 6, now it's at 8. And that seemed to me like somebody trying to maximize space for purely speculative reasons. And I don't think that they are good reasons. The questions then ultimately are about bin storage, and is planning happy with the bin storage facilities, because one of the major effects of HMOs is that the bins always seem to spill out into the streets and overflow. And I'll go back to my point about parking, particularly in Penryn Street, where I've had personal experience of never being able to park in Penryn Street, particularly in the evening time when all the residents are at home.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Chair, do you want me to answer those?
I was going to invite you to come in and
ahead. I
respond.
beg your pardon, Chair. So in terms of the outdoor amenity space and the bin storage issue, that's specifically addressed at paragraph 3.11 on page 100 of the agenda. And the conclusion is that there is sufficient space for bin storage. Clearly, it's a fairly small amount in terms of use by the occupants. But again, in paragraph 3.12, we refer to outdoor open space being fairly nearby. Those are conclusions that have been reached on similar types of HMO, albeit in different parts of the city. And so your officer's recommendations are informed often by those previous appeal decisions as well. In terms of highways, Chair, I will defer to my colleagues in highways. Suffice to say that the car ownership rates associated with HMOs tends to be fairly low, and for those reasons, we don't usually expect to have significant levels of parking associated with this type of conversion.
Thanks, John. I mean, I do understand in relation to highways, and it's one of those questions that gets raised on every occasion when we have HMOs about, car ownership. Anyway, but I mean, obviously members will make their own minds up. I've got Councillor Maloney next.
Thanks, Chair. My question is about the smallest bedroom. Now, I note that it says all the bedrooms have an ensuite. Excuse me. But given 7.5 square meters, I would expect an ensuite to take up at least 2 square meters. And then for a single bed, that would take up approximately 2 square meters, leaving 3.5 square meters, which is less than 6 foot by 6 foot, which is, I mean, you get more room in a prison cell than that. And it does seem to be, carrying on from Councillor Prince's comments, I think that particular room seems to be very, very small. And I'm wondering what the actual minimum size allowed is for such a development per bedroom. Thank you, Chair.
John, could you reiterate what you said earlier and explain in more detail?
Yeah, I'm fairly confident that the room sizes within that report refer to the rooms themselves and not the additional bathroom part of it. So the standard for single person occupancy rooms in an HMO, I think, is 6.5 square metres. They're nationally prescribed standards as well. And so they're the standards that are adopted by Liverpool.
Thanks, John. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. It's really interesting, some of the comments from our officers. I don't believe actually it's going to be HMO. I think it'll get planning permission and it'll be turned into Tuesday, Wednesday nights, Saturday, Sundays, football. It's not more certain. Why would a developer, and we see many developers who argue about every penny, so that they've got to pay in fees and all that kind of stuff. Why would they put a double bed in for what John has just said? They can only have 8 people within the building. They're putting a double bed in for one purpose only, to attract more people in there. So that my instinct says, and I wish officers would take more notice of what is happening in the Everton, the Kirkdale and the Anfield areas, with the proliferation of buildings being used for the football trade. 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights or whatever, causing absolute mayhem. Will do very shortly when it all kicks off again. Our people, our residents, they're the ones who suffer. There's issues going on now within Kirkdale and with Everton that our officers are not dealing with. It's trying to deal with them. But every weekend, residents are being disturbed, elderly people are being disturbed. And what are we doing? Well, at this point in time, I don't see we're doing anything. I really don't. And the amount of complaints that I'm getting, this is just from the weekend trade, going to town, coming back, doing whatever they're doing. And this building is going to be just like that. John made the comment in relation to, well, you've got the petrol station between the picture house and the apartments. I get complaints from Raymond Place and Mile End, that at the other side of Scotland Road, about the noise coming out of that place. But what are we doing? We're doing nothing. If I'm right, and that place is not becoming a HMO, and it's going to be used for daily lets, weekend lets, or whatever, which I suspect what will happen, those people will be arriving in cars. So the logic that our highways use on people in HMOs don't have cars don't necessarily follow. But what are we going to do? We'll rub our hands. We will say, well, there's nothing really we can do. But the residents that we represent within those areas, they're the ones who suffer. And really, it's a plea to the planning that you need to get a grip on what's going on in our areas. Because nobody appears to be care. Honestly, nobody cares. You get an email saying, I'm trying to deal with it. Well, go and tell that old lady who's been up all night, Friday night and Saturday night, that we're trying to deal with it. Because we're not. So for me, this is just another kick in the teeth to the residents of Everton and the residents of Kirkdale if it gets passed today, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hanson. I mean, there is a condition 6, that the maximum number of occupants residing at the property shall not exceed 8 persons at any one time. So those conditions are there for a reason, and I would expect them to be enforced. Do any other members have got any questions or comments? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Just picking up on a few things that people have said. If I'm right, if they decide to let this property as holiday lets for when football fans come and that kind of thing, they will need different permission. It's enforceable that they use it as an HMO, as they're saying they're going to. I've got loads and loads of sympathy with all the comments about the over-concentration of HMOs. I've seen it in areas where I've lived and in areas nearby where I live now. But unless we have an Article 4 directive for this area, we don't have a policy to rely on to deny this one application for an HMO. I know that Councillor Corbett would like us to look at it in the context of another application, but we have to look at each individual one. I do have a concern about the space. There was the question of space raised with that smallest of the bedrooms, and whether that includes the ensuite, or whether the ensuite is separate to the 7.5 or 7.3 or whatever it is. Can we get clarification on that? Would it be permissible, and I know we're not at that point yet, to defer this until we get, because I know you said you're fairly sure that the en-suites are separate from the actual size of the bedrooms, but I'd like us to be absolutely sure before we approve or reject it.
John, could you respond to that?
I mean, obviously, it's within the gift of this committee to defer it if that's what it wants to do, but I think we might be able to ascertain from the slides that we've already shown, because they should show, you'll have to forgive me because my eyesight is shocking, so I probably won't be able to tell unless I go right up to Mike's computer. Wouldn't like to say without a scale rule. Apologies. I can't tell from that because it's not got the actual dimensions on the rooms. So it's showing that room as 7.5 square meters, but what it doesn't have, and what I can't say without actually measuring the scale plans, is whether or not that 7.5 does cover the bathroom or whether it is just for the bedroom part of it. Does that make sense? So.
Sorry, Chair, on that last drawing, the kitchen next to the bedroom was 10 square metres, so proportionately it looked like it was the 7.5 was just the room, not including the bathroom.
Absolutely, Chair. My gut instinct is that it's almost certainly the 7.5 relates solely to the bedroom and not to the whole room, including the bathroom. So it would comply with the standards, but I can't give you 100% without having the plans in front of me, proper drawings and a scale rule. As I say, I'm 99% sure that it is 7.5 for the bedroom only, but that's maybe not enough.
Thanks, John. Do any other members? Councillor Cummins, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. On this subject matter that you've just raised, John, there is an element of ambiguity there. And you recognise that, and that is the reason why I'm suggesting a deferral to seek the clarity.
Chair, if I can assist the committee, I believe Councillor Thompson's already raised that particular point very clearly in terms of which Mr Hayes has tried to confirm, has indicated that this will require further checks. We do have an indication from Councillor Marrett to speak as well. Councillor Marrett.
Thank you, Chair. Just first of all, Chair, I'd like to take issue with the comments that when you said there'll be 8 persons in this property, and hopefully that will be enforced. To carry on from where Councillor Hanson left off, this is the issue we're having in these wards that Councillor Hanson has mentioned. Nothing is enforced. I'm sorry, but it's not. nothing is enforced in the regulations. It says, they always say in the committees here, that will be enforced, that will be enforced, that will be enforced. Once that property opens, the enforcement goes out the window. We then get the backlash from all the residents and nearby neighbours that's going on. And then that puts extra strain on the council resources, i.e. waste, everything, the police and everything with the issues that go on, because none of these conditions are enforced. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Marrett. Has any other members got any comments or questions they'd like to make? I mean, it's been an interesting debate, I think. Obviously, being on this committee for quite a long time, you know, we have discussed and debated these issues on many, many occasions. And on many occasions, we'd like to refuse applications because we understand the concerns and the complaints and the disturbance that local residents face. But unfortunately, we are bound by national planning policies, and we have to have policies that if we're going to refuse an application, we have the grounds to do that. It's been suggested this morning that we should get more information in relation to the smallest bedroom, whether or not it includes the ensuite. My instinct is that we should actually, would it be possible to delegate this to officers in relation to, because you've already said that you're 99% sure that this particular bedroom does not include the ensuite. Would committee be minded to approve the recommendation, bearing in mind all the complaints, and we know what you've said, but it meets the policies, the standards, and in terms of sort of refusing this, I think it's really, it's very difficult. If we could, in my view, approve the recommendation subject to making sure that the smallest bedroom does meet indeed the standards laid down by national policies and in line with our local plan, would that be acceptable to the committee? Councillor Prince.
I wouldn't be able to vote for that at all. I would be voting against that.
Chair, perhaps if I can just help here. If the room size was below the standard, which it would be if the 7.5 included the bathroom, then we wouldn't have brought it to this committee. It wouldn't be acceptable anyway. So that just perhaps reinforces what you're saying in terms of the potential recommendation here. We as officers would refuse it because it wouldn't comply with the planning standards, which use the HMO licence standards for the internal spaces. So 7.5 square metres that included the bathroom would not provide you with a bedroom of 6.5. I hope that makes sense.
Seems to make it a lot clearer. So,
Chair, could I just come back to that, please, if it's possible?
Councillor Cummins, I'm going to move a recommendation now. You can come back in or you can say something when I've moved the recommendation. Is that okay? I'm going to move that the recommendation be approved.
Thank you, Chair. Do members have any further motions or amendments to move in relation to the Chair's motion? Thank you.
I'll bring Councillor Cummins in and I'll bring Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. As what I said before, we have to rely on our local government officers to give us the planning application. On the issues that I raised before, it is ambiguous. Right, if it wasn't ambiguous, we would have the clarity. There's no clarity there. These are the reasons for my deferral, which I would propose.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
You suggested, before you actually made the recommendation, that it be conditional on getting absolute confirmation that that room is big enough, and we've heard that there's very little chance that it's not. Can we still keep that condition in there, please?
I mean, I'm happy to accept that as well. I mean, but I believe that we should move the recommendation to agree this application subject to confirmation that the small bedroom does indeed include meet the standards. So that's the recommendation. So we could go to the vote or ask if anybody wants to do something different.
Thank you, Chair. For purposes of clarity and for the benefit of those watching the live stream and proceedings, we've essentially got a number of issues to address as a committee. In the first instance, during the course of a detailed and extensive debate on what is a very emotive issue for the City Council and for members and indeed for all residents of the city, we've seen a number of issues and substantive concerns raised as to the prevalence and use of HMOs and their impacts on individuals, communities, residents and adjacent and neighbouring properties. We've also seen concerns raised in the context of the ability and capacity of the City Council to then take enforcement action to address issues as they may raise. As a counterpoint to that, we've heard from the case officer explaining an example in an adjacent area very close to this application site where indeed enforcement action investigation is in fact ongoing in relation to an unauthorised and unpermissioned use. So again, that demonstrates that enforcement activities are indeed being undertaken by the City Council and its officers. In terms of the context for the decision before you committee today, clearly you can only consider the application before you on its individual merits. Whilst members may legitimately speculate as to potential alternative uses for the application premises, you can unfortunately only determine in the application on the basis of the proposal before you today. Returning to the motion moved by the Chair, we have a motion moved to approve the recommendation and subject to final determination being delegated to officers once formal, clear clarification has been received as to the size of the smallest bedroom in the property and whether or not that square footage and square meterage does include or exclude the area of the ensuite. We now have an amendment moved by Councillor Cummings to in fact defer consideration of the application and for that clarification to come back to a subsequent meeting of Planning Committee. Councillor Cummings' amendment is moved, however at this stage it is not seconded. Therefore if any member wishes to second it or indeed move an alternative amendment, now is the opportunity to do so if you could indicate clearly.
Councillor Malone.
I second, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Maloney. We therefore have a valid amendment, the effect of which will be to defer consideration of this application pending clarification as to the room size. Councillor Hanson, I believe you're indicating.
Thanks, Chair. I think perhaps we're being disingenuous to our officers in relation to the information they've given us today. Now, I'm fairly confident that John has got it right. To delegate the decision to the officers is probably the right decision, but I think it's the wrong decision. I'm getting so frustrated as a local representative of this planning committee, and it's not consistent with the planning committee because there is regulations say we have to do what we have to do. But we're putting all this kind of stuff through, and we know the impact it's having on our residents. And we as an authority seem to do little or nothing about, or don't react to, or react very slowly to the problems our residents endure because of decisions that we are making here. And I'd like to say something in the very near future where we sit down and discuss the issues and problems, and we have our enforcement people and everybody else to have that discussion, have that debate, to come up with something, to come up with a plan or an action that alleviates what's happening to our people. There's lots of people sitting in this chamber that don't live in the Kirkdales and the Evertons and the Anfields of this ward. Lots of us do, and we suffer the issues and suffer the problems ourselves. So, Chair, can you take that away and have a look at what we can, what we can't do? But I have to say, I'm extremely reluctant to agree to support this because I suspect what's going to happen with that place, and I know the issues and problems that place is going to give us. Thanks for taking the time to listen.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hanson. We will take that away, and I will speak to officers to see what we can do in relation to that. Yeah, but nevertheless, can we go to the vote then?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Hanson as well, and your comments will be reflected in the minutes as well by way of assistance in terms of future actions for this committee and further reports back. In terms of what we have before us, we therefore have the Chair's original motion, and we also now have a valid amendment from Councillor Dave Cummings. For purposes of clarity, the effect of Dave Cummings' amendment will be that consideration of the application will be deferred if members are minded to. The case officer will then bring a further report back to committee confirming and clarifying the actual room sizes and whether these include or exclude the ensuite facilities, and then it'll be for a matter to committee, taking into consideration all matters raised today and in that subsequent debate to reach the decision on the application at that juncture. So that will not delegate it, it will mean a further report back to yourselves to clarify that matter. With that in mind, we'll turn to voting on the amendments. So firstly, your vote please, Chair.
Against.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bennett.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings.
For.
Councillor Hanson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Marat.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Prince.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Maloney.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Lake.
Against.
Thank you. And Councillor Key.
Abstain.
Thank you for your patience, colleagues. In terms of the voting on the amendments, 2 members have voted in favour, 5 members have voted against, and 4 members have abstained. Their dissension by name in terms of those who have abstained will be recorded directly as well. Would you agreement? The effect, therefore, is the amendment falls, and we now revert to conducting a vote in terms of the Chair's original recommendation. Chair, for purposes of clarity and noting the exchange between yourself and the Deputy Chair, have you indeed varied your recommendation to approve, subject to confirmation being provided as to the size of the smallest room, that being delegated to the Head of Planning? Is that indeed correct?
That's correct, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. That's much appreciated in terms of that clarification. So therefore, firstly, your vote, please, Chair.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett, please. Thank you. Councillor Cummings.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Marat.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Prince.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Maloney.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Lake.
Against.
And lastly, Councillor Key.
Against.
That concludes the voting on this application, and the outcome of the vote is 3 members voting in favour of the Chair's resolution, 6 members voting against, and 1 member abstaining. In such circumstances, when the committee resolves to refuse an application contrary to the recommendation within the case officer report, the effect is that a further report will come forward to a future meeting of the planning committee, confirming formally the reasons for refusal and reflecting on matters raised during the course of debate. Chair, if I can revert to you for the next item of business, which is item number 8 on today's agenda, and which relates to West Derby Road, Liverpool 13 in Tuebrook and Stoneycroft Ward.
I understand there are no speakers for this particular application. Therefore, can I ask the team leader to summarise this report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a fairly standard application for a proposed telecommunications mast. It is to be sited on West Derby Road in close proximity to the leisure centre, and as shown on the plan accompanying the agenda papers. The issues for you as a planning committee are therefore in relation to the siting and design, In terms of its siting, as it says in the report, and as you can see from the plans, that it's located with the backdrop of those large buildings associated with the leisure centre and the school and so on. It's also located on a fairly wide carriageway, and there are various other street furniture in there, including street lights and so on. Your officer's conclusion, therefore, is that this is okay in terms of its siting and design. It's an acceptable location. It's 15 metres high and comparable, therefore, with existing street furniture. So for all those reasons, Chair, we've recommended approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Do members have any questions? Councillor Leigh?
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment and then a question. First of all, I'd like to thank planning for the way in which they approached the siting of this particular mast, because I think I'm right in saying that the actual centre of the cell, the ideal position for the mast, would have put the mast in the centre of a built-up and residential area. And I noticed from the notes that care has been taken to look at alternative sightings before they arrived at this particular one. I've noted that the mast has been reduced in height as well. And I do agree that ultimately the positioning of the mast will make it to an extent unobtrusive. So I do thank planning for all of that. My further point though, and a question is, how many masts can there be in one particular area? There is a similar mast at the junction of Queen's Drive and Millbank in the Jolly Miller area. There is another mast at the next set of traffic lights at the junction of Muirhead Avenue and Queen's Drive. There are other masts on Muirhead Avenue. There are other masts on West Derby Road. There are other masts on Queen's Drive. How many of these things will there be? Is there a finite number? And how many can there be before they do become truly intrusive, very, very noticeable, and we will reach a point where the public will become very concerned about the propensity of these masts?
Okay, I don't know if Johnny wanted to respond to that, but isn't the demand driven by people wanting, 5G and, wanting their phones and equipment to work without getting breakages? So it's driven by demand, isn't it? But I'll let John come in and respond to some of the punches.
I'll try my best, Chair. I don't have the answers. As you say, Chair, it's driven by demand. This current swathe of applications that the committee is seeing over the last sort of 12, 18 months is driven by 5G. Some of the existing infrastructure, so the existing telecommunications equipment and the masts that are already dotted around the city, are not suitable for carrying the additional antenna to support 5G. So there's quite a number of masts that are in addition to the 4G network, so it's over and above the existing masts. Where we are able to and where the industry is able to, they will mass share. And I think this has been a discussion at this committee previously about how we try and encourage that. And there are some operators, regrettably, that aren't able to mass share. So I think that's probably as much as I can say, Chair, in relation to that. I don't know the numbers. As I say, that's driven by demand. It's also driven by the sort of coverage of 5G that the operators are trying to seek. And it's obviously driven as well by the technology. So I don't have any answers other than that this is all 5G related. And we will certainly see more of them. Just picking up on your final point there about at what point do we say no? Clearly, where there are masts going to be located very close to each other, where your officers consider that has a harmful effect in terms of the wider street scene, we will push back on them, and we have. I'm aware of one scenario I think on Egbert Road, where we have pushed back for exactly that reason, because of the proliferation of masts. I don't know what the outcome was. I'm pretty certain it went to appeal, but I don't have the outcome, unfortunately. But we will push back, and we do push back.
Thanks, John. Obviously, it mightn't be the answer that you wanted, but I think we can't challenge some of these applications based on competition or health grounds, and the rollout of 5G is one of the economic benefits that across the UK we're looking to obviously take advantage of. So, therefore, can I move that the recommendation be approved?
Thank you, Chair. Are there any amendments or revisions? No? In which case, Chair, your vote.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett? Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
I missed most of the debate, Chair, so I'll abstain.
Noted, Councillor Hanson. Thank you. Councillor Marat?
4.
Councillor Prince?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
4.
Councillor Maloney?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Lake?
Abstain.
And Councillor Key?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings, for your benefit, as you were absent from the chamber, that's why I've not asked for your vote. In terms of the outcome of the vote, we have 6 members voting in favour, no members voting against, and 3 abstentions, and 1 member ineligible to participate. The application is therefore approved on that basis. And we move on to our final item of business on today's agenda. Similar to our last item, this is item number 9 and relates to the ladies' gym on Prescot Road, Old Swan, Liverpool 13, and for reference, it's in Old Swan Ward. For members' benefit, I'll place some images on screen to assist, and once those appear, I'd ask the case officer to comment accordingly. Thank you.
Yeah, whilst we're waiting for the slides to come up, there we are. Thank you, Mike. Again, it's an application for telecommunications equipment. This time, the equipment is to replace and upgrade equipment that's already on the roof of a building within the Old Swan district centre, above a gym. So there's the property there. Again, the issues for you as a committee, for us as officers, has been whether or not the impact on visual amenity is appropriate, having regard to the requirement to provide additional telecommunications facilities. Your officer's view is, given the existing equipment that's already there, and that this will provide further opportunities for improved telecommunications performance, it's acceptable and recommended accordingly.
Thanks, John. Do any members have any questions or comments? No? Okay, well, given that this is replacing equipment that's already there, can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Any amendments or objections? No? In which case, Chair, your vote, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett? Thank you. Councillor Cummings?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Marat?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Prince?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Maloney?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Lake?
4.
And Councillor Key?
4.
Thank you. That concludes the voting on this application. The voting outcome is 9 members in favour, no members voting against, 1 abstention, and the effect of that is the application is therefore approved. And that concludes our items of business today. If I can invite the Chair to address committee with their closing comments.
Thanks, Mike. I think it has been an interesting meeting this morning. I would like to thank all the members who made contributions. I think it's been constructive in many ways. You know, it's still a learning process for some of the newer members on our committee. Obviously, we'll take some of the issues that have been raised this morning forward, and we will hopefully get back to you and possibly even have some sorts of sessions where we can discuss items like enforcement, etc., and the highways in particular. So I'd just like to thank everyone this morning for attending, and even people who have viewed online. So thank you all. And